this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Well, we did it. We made it to the start of 2024. Happy New Year, everybody. I don't know about you, but while 2023 was awesome, I'm really looking forward to an exciting year ahead. I'd like to thank everyone who came on the podcast this past year and took the time to share their unique perspective and knowledge with me, and I'm grateful to each of you for listening. But before we totally close the book on 2023, I want to look back on the year that was and recap some of the lessons learned from another great year of conversations. Joining me on the podcast today is John Zahurancik. As president of the Americas at Fluence, John is responsible for go-to-market implementation and honing customer-centric solutions for customers in the region. Prior to this role, John acted as chief operating officer, where he directed the Fluence teams that create and deliver storage solutions and services to leading customers around the world. Working with progressive power system players, John and his team create valuable business use cases for grid-scale storage, educate storage users in those benefits, manage the deployment of new systems, and help service those systems throughout their complete life cycle. John, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks, Clint. It's great.
So Fluence really, as I was doing research, seems to be kind of ahead of the curve consistently in working towards a more sustainable future. And I was wondering, when my sweet spot is talking about teams and teamwork and communications and things like that. Do you have any advice on how teams can be more efficient in driving innovation within their own teams?
Yeah, I think some of the things we've seen, I think you have to learn to cultivate problems, I guess, is one thing I would say for innovation. It's that phrase of problem is the mother of invention, or trouble is the mother of invention, And so I think looking at problems as an opportunity is one way for teams to cultivate it. And then the other is really just cross-functional teams, or just the more you can put people that don't naturally come into contact with each other, the better. So, and that's as simple as, do you have opportunities in your organization for people to talk to one another outside of a formal meeting, people that might not normally interact, because that's where you get this maybe cross-culmination, cross-cultivation of different ideas, where somebody that's working on maybe a financial problem and somebody's working on a technical problem, and you realize, hey, there's something here at this intersection. And, or you're working with a customer who's trying to solve something, and you're working on a product that you're trying to solve, but trying to see it from a different perspective a lot of times is really that source of innovation. So, it's how do you get different people into contact with one another in a productive conversation? And then do you create an environment where, people have time to sort of dream a little bit about what else could we do? So those are a few of the things that we try to do.
Joining me on the podcast today is Cathy Orquiola. Cathy is the West Region Vice President of PCL Construction, where she is responsible for strategy, operations, and performance in PCL's offices across Hawaii, Washington, and California. She's also an active member of the Young Presidents Organization and a dedicated supporter of the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Cathy, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Clint.
You're involved with the ACE Mentor Program, and I was wondering, I really admire your passion in investing in the future of construction. And how has your involvement in that program really influenced your leadership style, and how do you view membership today?
I came from a pretty tough upbringing, and I was so fortunate to have a science teacher who came alongside me in high school. And I actually had him for all 3 years. My high school was only a 3-year high school. So I had him for chemistry, physics, and AP bio. And he just really invested in me and showed me that, well, one, he helped me get into college. He helped me learn that, I could pay for college. I was the first person in my family to ever go to college. And so he helped me to get scholarships. And then he showed me that I had a great future in the STEM field, and that it was ripe with opportunities for individuals like myself. And so, having that fortune, I wouldn't be where I am today if not for Tracy Bailey, my chem, physics, and AP bio teacher in high school. He really helped to shape my future. And I want to do the same for other young students who may not have someone in their life that is able to do that. Or maybe they don't have someone that they can look at and be inspired to that looks like them, and say, hey, if that person can do it, they look just like me, I can do it too. Right. And so the idea of investing in these young students and giving them hope and unlocking the avenue towards success and showing them it's possible, because hope is so important when you come from that type of environment. It doesn't necessarily exist. And you think, well, I can't pay for college, so I can't go. And so being able to get young people excited about not only about construction and STEM opportunities, but just the idea that I can go and do and participate in a greater, bigger life with a greater, bigger vision.
Joining me on the podcast today is Doug Bawel. Doug is the chairman of the board and CEO of Jasper Engines and Transmissions and has been so for 11 years. Prior to his executive promotion, Doug dedicated 35 years to Jasper, the leading gas and diesel remanufacturer. Since Doug joined the company, Jasper has expanded to 11 manufacturing facilities with 78 branch locations across the country. In 2018, Forbes listed Jasper as one of America's best mid-sized employers. Doug, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Clint, glad to be with you.
So one of the questions I have is, what type of communication do you think yields the most consistent results, especially whether that's on-site or whether that's remote, and do you have to treat them differently? Do you communicate differently to the groups?
Well, I call it the platinum rule. Treat people the way they want to be treated. Our former chairman of the board was extremely detailed. And once in a while, I'd get all excited about a new project, and I'd go in and talk to him, and I'd sell the sizzle and the flavor and all this kind of stuff. And he'd look at me and said, Doug, let's sleep on this. And Clint, if he said, let's sleep on it a couple of days, I knew he was nowhere close to saying yes. And I realized I've got to come to him the way he wants me to come to him, with the facts and the figures. So when I'm on the shop floor, I'm going to have reports that they're used to seeing. I'm not going to bring in my report that I look at every day. I want to show them the reports that they have on their bulletin board. What was your last audit in safety and quality? What gains have you made? Let's talk about those. And there are areas that we've not. What can we do to get gains there? Are we not giving you the proper training? Are we not giving you the proper equipment? What about the proper tooling? And what I found is if you go to your people and you ask them, it's amazing what they'll tell you. But so often in businesses today, people keep bringing up things. Nobody does anything, so they stop doing. We have a program at Jasper called Continuous Improvement, where you submit continuous improvement ideas. Over the last 5 years, we've averaged 16,000 continuous improvement ideas each and every year, out of roughly 23 to 2,600 people. But what excites me more is we've implemented 85% of those each and every year.
Wow, that's
And
amazing.
it can be little things, titling something. It can be changing something on the floor to make sure. We had a fire alarm go off not too long ago. And it was simply a result that it wasn't marked off where these boxes should be. A box fell over, hit the fire alarm thing. Now we got people not knowing what the problem is. And it was so simple. But then share those best practices with other people.
Joining me on the conversation today is Kristen Sanderson, the VP of Customer Advocacy and the Chief Diversity Officer for GE Digital. As the Chief Diversity Officer, Kristen owns the operational goals and priorities related to inclusion and diversity and provides leadership to achieve those goals in partnership with HR, the rest of the senior leadership team at GE Digital, and with the other CDOs across GE. As VP of Customer Advocacy, Kristen is responsible for establishing customer connection into the business, leading the initiative to improve business processes to eliminate defects and drive customer sentiment across grid software. Kristen, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Best piece of advice I was given was you can't let the job be bigger than you. I see a lot of people, and for myself, I've experienced this. You take on a new role, it's overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. You're trying to learn a lot. You're trying to figure out how to act. You're trying to do things. And I see a lot of people stumble in that first part because they just get overwhelmed. They're working 80 hours a week. They're doing whatever, just trying to not to drown. You can't let the job be bigger than you. You have to be able to give yourself the mental space to step back and think about it, take it one step at a time, and have patience and tenacity to stick with it, and remember that you took this role and people put you in this role because there's faith in your ability to do that role. But don't, you got to kind of work your way through that initial challenge.
I got to believe that's harder to do than to say, though.
Very much so. But keeping it in your mind helps, and and better to have your network know that too, so that they can help you do it.
Today, I'm pleased to have with me Dr. Olga Kubassova, founder and CEO at Image Analysis Group, a leading AI-powered drug development and precision medicine company whose goal is to accelerate novel drug development by using the right analytical tools and modern trial infrastructure. She's an active researcher, co-author of 60-plus publications, scientific advisor, and mathematician with over 10 years of expertise in actively managing innovation in life science companies, asset positioning, strategy, and capital raising. She's a 4-time winner of National and International Entrepreneur of the Year awards. It's pretty impressive. Her ambition is to bring truly disruptive technologies, AI, and the best of machine learning to clinical practice and research. Olga, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for having me.
When I think of AI, medical isn't where I think about it, right? I mean, I think about Fahrenheit 451 and artificial intelligence being something. Now, of course, what's in the news is ChatGPT and all these other ones. So it's really fascinating to see what you've done with AI within the medical community.
Absolutely. But I think medical is really embracing it now, because obviously there are older people, population is getting older. You have more chronic diseases. You cannot afford not to do it. And to me, is just looking around us, right? So if you take a condition such as rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, osteoarthritis, huge market. In osteoarthritis, no treatments. Why is that? Because we can't yet prove that the treatment is working efficiently. And why can't we do it? Because there is a certain sophistication around trial design. And that almost takes a separate topic in its own right. So AI there could really help. Oncology, on the other hand, which is another medical field where we all could do with better treatments, you only have a handful of patients, so you can have a handful of data. How do you use this data wisely? How do you deploy more sophisticated measures to understand treatment impact or patient response at the earliest possible stage? Because here, you can save somebody's life and you can impact a new treatment paradigm. So that's how the blockbusters are being born, right? You start with 10 patients and you hope for the best. And if you actually use data instead of hoping for the best, or both, you could move much faster.
Joining me on the podcast today is Jim Sandusky. Jim is a longtime consumer electronics industry veteran with over 30 years of experience in business-to-consumer marketing, sales, product strategy, and finance. In 2017, Jim was appointed president of the newly formed Sharp Home Electronics Company of America, which brought together the divisions of Sharp Manufacturing Company of America, Sharp Electronics Marketing Company of America, and Services and Solutions Group. In this capacity, Jim oversees Sharp's home appliance manufacturing facility in Memphis, Tennessee, Sharp's U.S. sales and marketing operations in Montvale, New Jersey, and Sharp's national customer and dealer service operations. Prior to joining Sharp in 2011, Jim held leadership positions in sales and marketing at Panasonic, HP, Samsung, and Sony Electronics, as well as financial positions at General Electric. He holds a BSBA from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Jim, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thanks, my pleasure, Clint.
So I think I read somewhere that you have an open door policy, and I was curious as to what led to that.
Yeah, so when I say open door policy, I'm a firm believer in. You look at our office facility, it's a completely open style, and it has been for the last. Well, when I first joined Sharp, there were for the leadership or for the senior members of the team, there were offices that lined the windows on each side of the office space. And then you had kind of your bullpen area in the middle. I have to credit, my boss who hired me into the company, who, when we did a renovation of our office facility, he went to an open office style. And so down came all of the individual offices. And it wasn't without some trepidation from some members of the team about, losing the status of having an office with a door to it. But I accepted it and, just had like a cubicle type of area that was good for me. And when I needed more private space, there were actually what we call focus rooms that were available that you could go in, have a one-on-one conversation with somebody, or you could go in and make a phone call if you wanted to have some privacy for a phone call. And so I really credit, my boss at the time, for having that open office layout. And then when we moved a couple of years later to our current office location in Montvale, I ensured that our new office was going to be that exact same style. So I'm in a corner. I have a corner office location, but there's no walls, there's no doors, and everyone has that type of open office environment, and that really just fosters good communication. And it's also, again, this family style culture that I talk about with Sharp, where, we treat everybody with dignity and respect. And, whether, I encourage people that are, 2 or 3 levels down from me to talk to me, right? To come up, say hello. And I make a point of when I see them to say hello, as I pass them. So you really want to treat people well up and down the organization, just like you would want to be treated. And it also comes, I think, with an attitude of, I trust somebody until I'm proven otherwise. And fortunately, most people that I've trusted, they return that trust in return. So that's nice as well.
Joining me today is Ed Moss. He's been the president of Vox Automotive for nearly a decade. He has over 20 years of experience in operations and manufacturing for domestic and international commercial electronics companies. Ed spearheads new product launches on a multi-facility international basis. He has extensive experience in production, materials and systems, and inventory management. While with Vox, Ed has helped support a 50% growth for the leading automotive audio manufacturer. Ed, I'm so glad you joined me on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Clint. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
So what tips do you have for those wanting to pursue a leadership position? I'm just curious, what suggestions would you have for people wanting to be leaders?
Well, I think first you have to be willing to enjoy working with people of all, backgrounds. And you have to, be willing to deal with the conflict that arises when you're responsible for what a lot of people do. It's not easy being in middle management. We all have a boss, even as president and CEO, unless it's a private company. I have a boss. I have a board of directors, and we have investors that want to see improvement. As well, I have employees under me and they have employees under them. And, you have to be able to handle the pressure of both. And I think that it's something that you have to learn how to handle. I think my dad gave me some good advice that kind of leave the stress and the job at work. When you come home, shut it off and don't bring it into the family. That's easier said than done. After a long day, my wife says, "How did your day go?" And I'm like, "I'm sorry. I just really don't want to talk about it now because I'll be here till midnight telling you everything that went on. And I want to decompress." And she's understanding. "I'll catch you up on the weekend," kind of a thing. So it's not easy to do, though. It's not. So, I remember as a young supervisor, I'd stay up in bed thinking of different things I needed to take care of. And I would have a notebook next to my bed and a pen, and I would just write it down. I mean, now you've got your phone, you can put notes in there. But then I knew it was there for me in the morning and I could sleep well and I'd get up. Oh, yeah, okay, I need to get on top of these different issues. I think that to be successful, you can't rationalize poor performance. You can't make excuses. You can't get defensive. You need to turn problems into an opportunity to solve, to show that you're capable. Turn it into a challenge. Look at problems as the glass is half full, not half empty. I think nobody wants to work for a negative leader. It's you've got to be positive. If you want people to work for you, I think you have to be able to create a sense of of urgency and purpose around common goals. I think that's what good leaders do.
Joining me on the conversation today is Dr. Franklin Chang-Diaz, a man that has accomplished so much, I could fill the first half of the podcast just listing the accomplishments. But let me at least give a few highlights. Dr. Chang-Diaz is an astronaut and scientist. He has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Connecticut and a PhD in Applied Plasma Physics from MIT. He's been to space a record-tying 7 times. Born in Costa Rica, he was NASA's first Latin American astronaut to go into space. In addition to being in the NASA Astronaut Hall of Fame, he's a recipient of the U.S. Medal of Liberty, plus many other honors and awards. He's the founder and CEO of Astra Rocket Company, which is dedicated to the development of advanced plasma rocket propulsion. Dr. Chang-Diaz, thank you for joining me on the conversation today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So what advice do you have for aspiring leaders who are looking to build successful teams and achieve, the goal you're striving for is it's literally the stars. And so what advice do you have?
Well, you have to have a goal. You have to have an end goal, but not be so fixated into just that one goal. You have to be willing to adapt, change, alter your course, modify your procedures. I have always felt that it's better to have small advances, but very frequently, rather than large, leaps of achievement in that are very rare. So small advances are easier to manage, and you learn a lot quicker that way. And then the next advance is already has the lessons learned from the previous one. So so it's a collection of small steps, to me, the best approach, rather than a large, leap that could be a failure and would set you back for a long time. So that's a piece of advice that I tell people is important.
I think that's also important for people, right? Because people get to see they get the win, as opposed to putting all this effort in for something that takes so long to make that big step change. At least now as a team member, I see the victory and it inspires me to keep working hard,
Yes. And also gives you less fear of failure because, you can afford to have a small fall or a small failure, and then you can recover from that and then, pick up your things and keep going. Change, obviously, you have to change, you have to modify. But with that recipe, you also need to be spring-loaded to fail and be okay with failure because that's how you learn.
Joining me on the conversation today is Dr. Brad Walkenhorst, the Chief Technology Officer at Bastille Networks. He's an expert in RF sensor networks and has a passion for securing enterprise networks. Dr. Walkenhorst received his BS and MS degrees in electrical engineering from Brigham Young University and received his PhD from my alma mater, Georgia Tech. He specializes in signal processing and electromagnetic research applied to wireless communications and spectrum operations. He has an extremely impressive track record in his field and is a gifted speaker and technical contributor with over 70 publications and 4 patents. It's always a pleasure to connect with a fellow Yellow Jacket, so thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, Clint. Appreciate you having me on.
Are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the most important things that I try to do is to listen. That probably sounds really simple, but I find it to be extremely powerful. Everybody has a unique perspective, and everyone has the potential to offer some insights that make our company and our products better. So I try to listen across the board with everybody that I interact with, but I really try hard, especially to listen carefully to my direct reports. So people who rely on me for guidance, I want them to know that I am always accessible. And of course, in any given moment, I may not be available, but I want to be available as soon as possible to address those needs, concerns, questions, whatever they might be. And with that deep listening, where I seek to understand someone else, sometimes it's as simple as just validating them as a person. Maybe they didn't feel validated for some reason, and I can help bring that connection to the company, to that interaction. Sometimes I'm able to dig deep and maybe offer some insights to that person, maybe teach them something that they didn't know. And the most satisfying interactions are when they come up with ideas that point me in a new direction, that help teach me something that shifts my perspective or broadens it in some way. So I begin to see more of the landscape more accurately. So anyway, I just think listening is so key, and that's one of the things that I really focus on as a leader.
Today, I have the privilege of talking with PSI team member and personal friend David Halm. He's a senior consultant on our team and has been supporting our clients for 18 years and counting. How do you think that the product success method, which is the methodology we use, how do you think it contributes to these successes?
Just what you said earlier, it drives the conversation. For anyone who's taken the course, they know that our first case study in the project success method in our training class is this isn't rocket science, and in the end, of course, it's not. It's just these conversations do not happen if there's not some catalyst to make them happen, basically. And PSM allows that, and it does it in a way that's non-threatening. People can be candid about what their requirements really are. It allows them to get an understanding of what their work is, again, how it fits in with everybody else's, and it allows them just from the planning session, the first opportunity to really identify what some of the issues are going to be that threaten a successful delivery of the project, and they can immediately start taking the steps to mitigate those risks. And so that's really the benefit.
Yeah, I think if somebody who doesn't know, what we do when they observe it for the first time would probably be surprised. If you think about project management, that's very process oriented, right? Task A takes this many days. It's got a predecessor and a successor, and certainly, no doubt about it, we spend a lot of time on process. But I think the thing that surprises people is the amount of time we spend on the people side of the equation, because it's not just about A takes 5 days. It's who's doing A, what else do they have on their plate? Do they truly understand A? What do they need from other people? How does that impact what they're doing? When they finish their task, who gets it next? And it's really about the people understanding not only their piece of the puzzle, but how they fit into the overall project. And I think that's again, we go back to the conversations, but it's the clarity that comes out of the conversations that we force by being there. So I've always said that people and process are two sides of the project management coin, and everybody thinks about the process side, but I think they'd be surprised at how much we focus on the people side.
Exactly. And, one of the issues we face as a company is that it's very, very difficult to articulate what we do in a way that people truly grasp it. You really have to see it to understand it. And so that's why we typically enter these planning sessions with, I won't say pushback, that's probably too strong a word, but people are really there because they've been told they need to be there rather than because they want to be there. And pretty quickly they learn, this is where I want to be, because this is helping me figure things out in a way that would have never happened in any other scenario.
Joining me today on the conversation is Cheryl Lim. Cheryl is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Vertiv, a leading global provider of critical digital infrastructure. Cheryl has been with Vertiv for the past year, but prior to that, she spent 20 years at Honeywell in a variety of human resources roles. Cheryl, thanks so much for joining me on the conversation today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
At what point in your career did you discover that you had a passion for leading teams? If there was an aha moment, can you tell me more about that experience?
Yeah, certainly. And actually, it wasn't until I moved with Honeywell to the United Kingdom. It'll be I've been with the company about 10 years by this point. And in the early part of my career, and as well as even my early part of my HR career, I'd at maximum sort of led about 3 or 4 people. So they were very small teams. And all of a sudden, I was in a country role and had nearly 50 people reporting to me. So I went from sort of 3 people reporting to me to 50 people reporting to me. And I remember being a little daunted by that. And I remember a colleague said to me, if you can lead 1 or 2 people, you can lead 20 people, or you can lead 200 people. And I thought about that for a while, and I think that was my aha moment to the question. It was absolutely right. I mean, fundamentally, the principles still apply no matter how big your team is. You know, you need to communicate a clear direction. You need to make sure you have a diverse team with different experiences, but that you treat equitably. You know, get the best out of your team. You got to set, you know, that clear direction and set a high standard and have people perform to that. And give people very, very constructive feedback on how well they're doing. So all those principles still apply. It's a bit more complex because now you're having to ensure that your team is organized the right way at all times. But the principles of leadership actually are still the same. And I actually loved it. I went from the 50 then to 300. And again, it just became a little bit more complex, but not fundamentally different as a leader.
Joining me on the conversation today is Cindy Cookson. Cindy is the Vice President of Global Product Line Management at the Gates Corporation, a global leader in power transmission and fluid power products and services. Cindy has been with Gates for over a decade, but prior to that, she spent 10 years in various roles at Michelin, eventually serving as a plant manager. She has a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from Kansas State and a dual master's degree in industrial engineering and operations research from NC State. I'm also an ACC guy, so we got that going for us.
Nice.
Cindy, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So as you move up in your career, you're asked to manage more and more people. So how have you succeeded in transitioning from industrial engineer to more of a people manager as you move up the corporate ladder? And specifically, are there any communication strategies that you've learned along the way that have been helpful in that endeavor?
Yes. I think I have been purposeful in like kind of how I've evolved my leadership skills, including management skills, and communication is a huge part of that. I have this note on my computer. It's I think it's just an old saying. 2 stonecutters were asked what they were doing. One of them said, "I'm cutting this stone into blocks." And the second replied, "I'm on a team that's building a cathedral." And I think that is so impactful that it's not just like how we're communicating, but also what we're communicating. Getting people involved in the why and communicating why their job is important and how they fit into the bigger picture brings so much engagement and involvement and commitment from our teams. I think a big part of my role, especially as I've grown in a leader, is managing cross-functional teams. And it's even more important with cross-functional teams where everybody sees the bigger picture, not just this small focused thing that you're asking them to do, but how it fits into the project goals, the annual goals, the overall company's strategy. So getting everybody involved in that why, I think, is really key.
Joining me today on the conversation is Rob Mortensen. Rob is the General Manager for Delivery Systems and Services for North America and Europe at EMD Electronics, a company that provides a broad range of high-tech products and solutions for the semiconductor industry. Rob has over 25 years of experience in the sector, including 7 years at Intel. He holds an undergraduate degree in chemistry from the University of Colorado and an MBA from the University of New Mexico's Anderson School of Management. Rob, thanks for joining me on the conversation today.
Thanks for having me, Clint. I'm really, really happy to be here.
What's the best book or article you've read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
I love to read, and I haven't found a whole lot of time to do it recently. But the most interesting thing that I've heard lately is my son sent me a podcast. It's called 99% Invisible. And I don't listen to all of them, but he sent me a specific one about a group of individuals in Mexico City who buy and resell metal, and how in Mexico City the unofficial market, is about 50% of the business market there, and there's a lot of noise. I don't know if you've ever been to Mexico City. My wife's from Mexico City, so we spent some time there. There's a lot of noise in the market trying to get attention. So this podcast was about a specific reseller who, at one point in his career, realized like my voice and my message is the same as everybody else's, and he asked his 9-year-old daughter to tape his message so he could record it and then blast it out throughout the streets while he's going up and down the streets. And it was unique enough that he got a lot of attention. And what he did with that attention is he was really generous with it. He didn't go out and try to profit a lot from that. He relied on his business to generate profits, but for other resellers in the same market, he shared that with them. And it spread across the city. So now this little girl's voice is all across the city and has kind of become a cultural thing, you know? And to me, it was so insightful that when we are generous with the work that we do as individuals, obviously as businesses, we need to monetize our product. That's part of being a business. But when we as individuals are generous with what we know, and we share it with others, we all grow together and our business grows. And I thought, even though it wasn't a business related podcast, when I finished with that, I've talked about it so many times with our teams. It was like really, really interesting how such a small act of generosity spread across a city of 22 million people, you know, second or third biggest city in the world. And now there's, you know, artists who are sampling this little girl's voice and working it into their music. And it's just become kind of a cultural phenomenon. And it just started with somebody who's willing to be generous with what they've learned.
Joining me today on the conversation is Juan Gutierrez. Juan is the CEO of Global Services at Siemens Gamesa, a renewable energy company focused on harnessing the power of the wind to provide clean energy, address the climate emergency, and build a better world for future generations. Juan has been with Siemens in some capacity for over 18 years, holding various leadership positions across the company, including Senior VP of Marketing and Sales and Senior VP of Latin America. Prior to that, Juan earned his bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the Universidad de Los Andes in Bogota, Colombia, a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Illinois, and an MBA from Rollins College. Juan, thanks so much for joining me on the conversation today.
Thank you for inviting me. Glad to be here.
You have a global footprint, and so you have internal customers, and of course you have your external customer that you end up selling to. Are there tips and tricks about how you communicate well between the different groups and be able to get your message across in a consistent way?
I think the biggest challenge is communication, always, right? Because one thing is what you say, and the other thing is how people perceive it and how people translate that into what they want to know. So for me, being a global company, I'm dealing with many different cultures, right? I have 5 regions. We have projects in India, we have projects in Brazil, in the US, in Europe, in many different areas. And I think this is a challenge, but I think the most important thing is to understand the differences, to understand the different cultures. I feel privileged because being raised in Colombia, studied in the US, and work all my life with Germans, Danes, and Spanish, it gives me a good idea of, you know, how different cultures behave, let's say. I think the key is that you don't change the message when you communicate, right? For me, the message should be the same, because otherwise you're not, you know, saying what you mean. The key for me is how you deliver the message. So it's how do you approach it, how you deliver. And I think that changes depending on the culture or even the function. So some people like to be more structured, more formal, more direct. And then some like to be very informal, more, you know, face-to-face communication. Some people like to be told what to do. Some people like to be part of the conversation and be able to give an opinion and give the feedback. And at the end, for me, the key is that the message is clear and that you actually get buy-in from the people. Like, otherwise, the communication is not effective at all.
We actually open the podcast every week with the quote from George Bernard Shaw that says, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And I think you kind of hit it at the very end of your answer there, which is people need to be able to ask you questions back and get what I call clarification on which direction you want to go, so that they're able to better understand the message and how you really intended it, as opposed to hearing it through my language barrier or the way I define terms, or even if I'm having a bad day or not, I may receive the message in a different way. So I like the fact that, hey, you pointed out that you have to deal with different people different ways. Some people like to be just told, hey, go do this. Other people like to be a part of the conversation. But in the end, you need to make sure the message gets across.
Exactly. I think there's a couple of key things that I always think about, the communication skills. First one, I think you have to be authentic and consistent. I think people would always feel that if you're just reading a document or just being told to say something versus do you really believe in it? So I think it's important that you believe in it, that you're authentic, and then you're consistent with your actions, right? That what you said in a town hall, then you actually do the same and act on it on the next meetings that are coming, right? If you don't believe in it, it doesn't matter how you say it, the message will not get through, right? And then the second part is to be able to have good communication, you need to be a good listener. So you also need to listen more, meaning if they're telling you, I'm not getting the message, or it doesn't work, or I don't believe in it, don't ignore it. Listen to them, spend the time, and always take feedback as a gift, right? So if I look at my role, I make a lot of questions. I had a colleague that told me, you manage my questions. And it's really because I like to listen what others are thinking and to understand if what I'm thinking and what I'm trying to communicate is getting through, right? So I think listening and asking questions is also a key part of communication.
Thank you for joining me on this look back edition of The Conversation. As we move further into January, I want to reiterate how grateful I am for your support and all the conversations I've shared over this past year. Here's to a great 2024 filled with even more engaging discussions, fresh perspectives, and valuable insights. Stay tuned for some great guests to come.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.